Well, thank you, Mark, for inviting me to talk at this workshop. Bit of a change of topic to cockatoos, but of course cockatoos are very much associated with Banksia woodland, so fits very well with this workshop. So my project was on Carnaby's cockatoo, and Carnaby's cockatoo is one of 3 black cockatoos that are endemic to southwest Western Australia, all of which are threatened. They're highly mobile, so they're a migratory species, so they breed in inland areas and then come to the Swan Coastal Plain during the non-breeding season. And so the food resources on the Swan Coastal Plain help them get into conditions so they can go back to the inland areas to breed, so they're very important. They form large flocks and they roost communally at night time, and of course their favourite food is Banksia. So Banksias and cockatoos, they're pretty iconic, and as was previously mentioned by Greg, George Seddon's book, A Sense of Place, very much Banksias go hand in hand with Perth as being giving you a sense of what's home. If you've lived here for any time, you see a Banksia and that reminds you of being home. Banksias also need Carnaby's cockatoos. So Banksias help the cockatoos help the Banksias by dispersing their seed. They've been known to carry cones for over 1 kilometre, and they also preferentially remove flowers and cones infested with insect larvae. So for species such as Banksia tricuspis, they actually increase the amount of viable seed they produce because they divert the energy of the plant into producing the viable seed rather than the cones that are infested with the insect larvae. They also assist the plant by pruning it, and again that increases vigour as well. But what's happened to our Bankshe woodland? Well, historically a large chunk was cleared for pine plantations, but that has been studied, and the cockatoo's response to that was that they would eat the pines instead. And a large chunk is and continues to be cleared for housing and infrastructure. But this area hasn't been studied very much, and that's what my project was about. So images such as this, where Banksia woodland has been cleared for housing, how do the cockatoos respond to that? I mostly focused not on the recent clearing of the Banksia woodland, but the more established suburbs as to how the cockatoos were using the gardens and that sort of stuff. So why study urban foraging ecology of Carnaby's cockatoo? Well, it's to develop conservation strategies. We need to know where they're feeding so that we can protect it. We need to know what they're feeding on so we can protect it and plant it. We need to know how far they're foraging and also any spatial and temporal patterns in that so that we can assess impacts and also minimise impacts of development. So I used satellite telemetry to undertake this study. So satellite telemetry provided the spatial scale and identified important foraging areas and roost sites, and it also enabled me to find flocks to then be able to follow to get field observations of what they're actually feeding on. So my study birds were birds that had been injured, hit by a car or whatever, so they're wild birds, but they've been rehabilitated so I could catch them because it's very hard to catch a wild bird. They were put under anaesthetic and fitted with satellite tracking devices to their 2 central tail feathers. I had 23 study birds that were fitted with these devices. They were released and I drove around following them. It was that easy. Not. They would just fly over the river or something like that, and I had to find a bridge to keep following them. It was good fun. So I was out there in the field for many hours, and I got lots of observations of what they were feeding on, both native foods and exotic foods, and also not just what they were feeding on, but where they were feeding, which was not always the wisest locations. That gave me lots of dots on a map, lots and lots of dots on a map. So to break it down a little bit more, to make it a bit more meaningful, this is just 3 examples of maps of individual birds. So this one over on the left, you can see that urban areas are not a problem. The CBD of Perth is just here, and so they're using all the urban landscape to forage. This bird in the middle was very sedentary. It very much like the suburbs of Nedlands and Dalkeith. This bird here used a lot of the re-veg sites that we've been talking about in the Jandakot Regional Park and that sort of area, but it moved around a bit more. So I determined that they travel about 5.5 k's from roost and to roost in the evening, a maximum about 23 kilometres or 70 kilometres when they're actually migrating, when they're really wanting to get somewhere. I identified a bunch of roosts. Some of those roosts are used more often than others, and those 18 roosts they use most often, I was able to calculate foraging areas around those roosts. And each one of those roosts has a patch of remnant Bankshe woodland, which they use as a breakfast bar, I called it. They'll quite often leave the roost and go to that remnant Bankshe woodland to forage first thing in the morning. And it wasn't just used for foraging, but the dead Bankshias or other vegetation in there, they'd like to use that for perching, preening, socialising. So I think these patches have got more value to the birds than just as a food habitat as well. Looking at the field observations a little bit more, the things they most commonly fed on were native foods, so the Banksias and the marri, urban trees such as tipuana and liquid amber, and things that are sometimes planted in crops or plantations, but also scattered trees throughout the urban landscape, so pine, macadamia, pecan. Now these colours of the words are to help you interpret this map. So you can see in different areas they're targeting different foods, but obviously in the metro area, lots of different coloured dots, they're feeding on all different sorts of feed resources, whereas in this Jandakot Regional Park, Banjup sort of area, they're feeding a lot of the Banksias, of course. Up here, a lot of marri, but also Banksia, and there are also macadamia orchards are scattered throughout here, and also this area down here as well. So that's looking at the feeding observations spatially. Looking at them temporality, the Banksias provide food throughout the year. So whether it's the seed, the nectar, or grubs, or sometimes the leaves they feed on as well, they provide food resources throughout the year. Whereas a lot of the non-native foods, particularly the pines, you'll see that there's a peak of them feeding on them early in the year, but that drops off. And then they move on to the liquid amber and the pecan, and later on onto the tipuana, and those food resources are available for a shorter period of time during the year. So what does it mean? Well, Carnaby's cockatoo use Bankshe woodland wherever it's available. Small patch, big patch, doesn't matter, they'll use it. Bankshe woodland near roosts may be important, but they also feed extensively on exotic urban trees, so pines and liquid amber, tipuana, pecan, a whole variety. I've just focused on the things they fed on most, but they do have quite a diverse diet in the urban landscape. So they've adapted to living in urban areas. So in summary, Bankshe woodland that was cleared for pine plantations, well, the cockatoo response, let's eat them. Bankshe woodland cleared for people's housing, etc. Cockatoo's response, let's eat them. Well, the gardens, not the people. This is a picture of Chasey pulling a button off Leanne's shirt there. So they're adaptable, which is great, but the Great Cocky Count, which is an annual census of cockatoo numbers, shows there's a decline of at least 10% per year for the last 6 years. So they're still declining. So that means that we really need to look after our Banksia woodland remnants. We need to look for opportunities to plant food for the cockatoos, so whether that be parks, gardens, private property, street trees, wherever we can provide opportunities, so that we can create a more cockatoo-friendly landscape. And that landscape's going to be greener, there's going to be more space for mature trees, there's going to be a variety of foraging and roosting opportunities, and by having a variety of opportunities, it's more resilient to change. So if you lose one patch of habitat to an urban development, there's another one that's been grown to replace it, and so on. You need to be more resilient. So the result, cockatoos survive and achieve breeding condition, and also we have a happier and healthier urban environment for people too, because a greener landscape is better for us too. And thank you to all those people that helped in my project.